They are naturally created machines that operate with the energy of 10,000 nuclear bombs. They're tropical storms with wind speeds that can reach up to 230 miles per hour, capable of generating enough electricity to power the entire United States for months. They are tropical cyclones. In the Pacific Ocean, they're called typhoons, and in the Atlantic, they're called hurricanes.
That cluster of thunderstorms that came off the coast of Africa moved right through the Caribbean, moved right across Central America, and eventually developed into a named storm in the Pacific.
I've never felt anything like that in my life, no. No, that was one of the most intense, terrifying experiences I've ever had in my life.
It's like a giant engine that begins sucking heat from tropical waters to fuel itself. With winds that can reach up to 300 kilometers per hour, a hurricane is a wonder of nature. Highly destructive, complicated in design, and difficult to predict.
Hurricanes or typhoons or cyclones, they have several names, are machines, we will say, with extremely complex thermodynamics. It is a very large cloud system, naturally, which has a vortex structure, therefore something that revolves around itself. It feeds on the weather, on the vapor from the ocean. This vapor is then transformed into rain. They're objects that are hundreds of kilometers long, even up to almost 1,000 kilometers long.
The tropical cycle is really the result, in jargon, of an ocean-atmosphere coupling. There really is a transfer of energy in the form of heat and humidity between the ocean and the atmosphere. And that's what makes a cyclone live.
So hurricanes really start as a cluster of thunderstorms. We consider them areas of low pressure where actually there's rising air. As air rises, the moisture condenses into clouds.
There will be the formation of a depression at the place where the air began to rise.
L'air qui se trouve juste au-dessus de l'océan chaud, il va se charger en chaleur et en humidité au contact de l'océan.
And this will create a suction of the surrounding air, which will then move towards the depression.
Par conséquent, il va y avoir formation d'une dépression.
It's colossal. That's because there are two types of energy to consider. There is the thermal energy associated with the hurricane, and there is the kinetic energy, which is the energy associated with the wind.
When wind speeds reach 119 kilometers per hour, a hurricane is born. In the Atlantic, the official hurricane season begins on the 1st of June and lasts until the end of November.
Distinctive hurricane seasons that have everything to do with having an ocean water temperature that's warm enough to support hurricanes. Typically, we need ocean water temperature at least 27 degrees Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit to support these storms.
Hurricanes primarily occur in the Caribbean Sea, the Eastern Pacific or Southern Atlantic Oceans, and the Gulf of Mexico. But the genesis of these storms is found on the African continent and the Saharan Desert. Hurricanes primarily occur in the Caribbean Sea. As one of the largest deserts in the world, the Sahara covers 25% of the African continent, more than 3 million square miles. This desert's wide expanse of sand absorbs heat and then radiates vast amounts back into the atmosphere. The heat and humidity over equatorial Africa create thunderstorms. These storms travel west over the Atlantic Ocean and can organize into a tropical depression.
We saw this cluster of thunderstorms pushing off the coast of Africa. This is a tropical wave. Some people get confused when they hear wave, they're thinking the kind of wave that surfers ride in the ocean, but atmospheric waves often are just areas of disturbed weather that track through the tropics.
On August 28, 2014, a tropical wave off the African coast catches the attention of atmospheric scientists of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States. The storm is steered by the trade winds, the prevailing winds that flow permanently from east to west across the Earth's equatorial region.
That cluster of thunderstorms that came off the coast of Africa across the tropical Atlantic moved right through the Caribbean.
Los Angeles resident Jennifer Lowry has been waiting to go on a planned vacation to Cabo San Lucas, a resort city at the southern tip of Mexico's Baja California peninsula. With over 200,000 residents, Cabo is known for its beaches, outdoor restaurants, and bars.
And it was just traveling down for the weekend with two of my best girlfriends. Just a quick weekend getaway, very casual.
September 3rd, 2014. What started out as a tropical wave off West Africa is now a poorly organized storm that is slowly crossing Central America. The United States government's National Hurricane Center warns of the possibility for this wave to develop into a low-pressure area south of Mexico and later into a tropical cyclone.
The cluster of thunderstorms arrived in Central America around September 3rd, moved out into the Pacific. It became a tropical depression, which is a closed circulation, a closed area of a disturbance. It never really developed into a hurricane or a tropical storm in the Atlantic, so it never got a name. But moving out into the Pacific, it got better organized.
Yeah, so that day it was a lot of hanging out by the pool and walking down to the beach, just, again, only overhearing a couple minor conversations, but nothing, no announcements from the hotel, nothing, even on the weather radar that would indicate a threat in terms of a hurricane headed our way. But heard rumors that it was out there, but not headed in our direction. And so we just went about our day. We went down to the beach, just a happy little holiday. There was nothing indicating that there was anything amiss.
The large system of thunderstorms slowly progresses westward and gradually organizes over the next few days. An increase in thunderstorms prompts the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida, to upgrade the tropical depression to tropical storm status.
The winds reached 39 miles an hour, where it became a tropical storm. And they're given a name in the Pacific and the Atlantic.
The World Meteorological Society assigns the storm a name.
In this case, it got the name of Odal, late on the day of September 9th, 2014.
Storms are given first names because, in the end, it speaks more to the people. And in general, people are more attentive to phenomena when they are given a first name than, for example, a number. It was the sailors who started to give names to cyclones. The funny thing is that in the beginning they used to give female names to the cyclones they encountered. I don't know if it was because of their unpredictability, devastating nature, I don't know.
Now, Odal is starting to get noticed.
There were some rumors rumors around the hotel or some murmurings that the storm was strengthening and was headed back east, so towards the Cabo Peninsula. No indication it was going to be a major disaster.
From there, Odal really started to strengthen a little bit as a tropical storm, but something really interesting from September 11th to September 13th, 2014. The forward speed had dropped and it drifted in somewhat of an erratic path. That makes it a little bit harder to forecast the direction and the intensity when storms are drifting like that.
The storm had changed course fairly rapidly. It had turned east, but was still not headed directly for the Cabo Peninsula.
But around September 13th, the steering became a little more pronounced. We had a mid-level ridge of high pressure to the east, an upper-level area of low pressure to the west. And as these systems became more pronounced, it enabled Odal to have better guidance and better upper-level tracking and guidance from above, really. And that enabled the storm to start accelerating. Not only did Odal start accelerating towards the coast of the Baja Peninsula of Mexico, but it actually intensified very rapidly at that time as well.
With wind speeds increasing to over 119 kilometers per hour, Tropical Storm Odal is becoming a hurricane, capable of much more devastation.
On Saturday, or September 12th, we started hearing about the storm from some of the other people in the pool. Often kind of overheard some conversations from some other travelers saying that, oh, there was a hurricane developing in the Pacific, but it wasn't really a threat. At the time, it was headed out west, but it's there, just to kind of keep an eye on. But again, at that time, it was not even on our radar. It was just kind of like, oh, there's a storm, no big deal, we'll be fine.
Odal rapidly intensified from a tropical depression to a tropical storm, and then right up to a Category 3 hurricane, which is considered a major hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. So it became a very violent and very dangerous hurricane. The winds increased by 55 knots. That's about 63 miles an hour, or more than 100 kilometers an hour in less than 24 hours. So very rapid intensification.
The National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida, upgrades the storm to hurricane intensity on September 13th.
And some of the other guests would say, there's no shot there's ever going to be a big storm here.
But Jennifer and her fellow resort guests in Cabo have no idea that their lives are about to change forever. What started out as a tropical wave off the West African coast lumbered across the Atlantic Ocean and Central America. Now in the Pacific Ocean, a large central area of thunderstorms has taken form, surrounding a circulating center. The National Hurricane Center designates the storm as Hurricane Odal. The initial forecast is that Odal will track westward, curving out to sea and avoiding land. In the resorts of Cabo, a minor weather alert is posted.
When we first started to hear rumors of it, or just that it was out there, nothing more than a little excitement. Coming from Southern California, there's not a lot of weather, so the thought of a big storm that might potentially let us have an extra day off work and stay in Mexico an extra day seemed exciting, but that's about it. Nothing dangerous, nothing fearful. We walked around the property, took pictures, and again, at that point, it was more of a novelty, like this is really, really exciting and fun. And we didn't, think there was a little bit of concern, but nothing that, we weren't fearful for our lives at that point. And there was no major reason for concern at that point.
While scientists know how a hurricane develops, they know less about what the storm is likely to do.
As soon as there is a phenomenon that begins to resemble a hurricane, researchers, especially the American researchers, since they're the ones most concerned by these hurricanes, they will begin to run models to try to forecast, to see if the hurricane will develop, and above all, to predict its trajectory.
Really, one of the limitations of forecasting sometimes is not having enough data, especially in hurricane forecasting. That helps us predict through computer modeling what it's going to do in the future.
For over half a century, information from satellites is used to track the movement of hurricanes.
Satellites allow us to measure the surface temperature of the water. They obviously allow us to monitor tropical cyclones. We can see them forming over the ocean, even though they have not yet fully developed.
Satellite advances in the last 40 or 50 years have enabled us to sample the weather through satellites, detecting cloud formations, hurricane formations, data. We don't know what's happening over time in the hurricane. Sometimes it's hard to sample these areas.
Retrieving data from battering wind speeds of 240 kilometers per hour seems almost impossible.
When a hurricane begins to threaten the United States, the Americans send planes specially designed to fly into cyclones.
Flying directly into Odal are NOAA's two P-3 Orions and a Gulfstream 4 jet for hurricane observations. These are the hurricane hunters. Manned by pilots, scientists, and researchers, these brave men and women fly straight into one of the most destructive forces of nature.
They're very valuable because they'll fly into hurricanes, they'll fly transects across the hurricanes at different elevations, sampling temperature, humidity, wind speed, all these valuable data inputs that go into our models.
On board is high-tech equipment, like radar and fixed probes that measure particles in the air. Buffeted by howling winds, blinding rain, and violent drafts, these aircraft can slice through the eye wall of this monster, entering the relative calm of the storm's eye.
In the center of the storm, you have the eye of the cyclone. On average, its diameter is about 50 kilometers. So in the eye of the cyclone, there's almost no wind. In general, there are no clouds. In any case, there is no rain. Sometimes there can even be blue sky. And around this eye, there is an area where there is a lot of rain, where the winds are extremely strong. It's called the cyclone wall. And beyond this area of the cyclone wall, there are actually spiral bands, bands of rain.
Direct observations of the lower eye wall, where the strongest winds exist, help forecasters understand critical information about the storm's development, how intense the hurricane will be, and where and when it will strike land. But being so close to the ocean is too hazardous even for these aircraft to fly. So the hurricane hunters collect additional data by releasing weather devices into the storm.
They'll actually drop sensors out of the airplanes that are tethered to parachutes. They're called drop zones, and they actually go through an atmospheric column collecting data on the way down. They give us a snapshot of what's happening in the atmosphere at a certain time and at a certain location.
As drop zones fall toward the ocean, they transmit data such as pressure, temperature, wind speed, wind direction, and moisture to scientists aboard the Hurricane Hunter aircraft.
Drop zones actually, they provide a snapshot of data in time. There's innovation and experimentation now with launching drones into hurricanes, and those do two things. If a drone can stay airborne for hours, instead of getting a snapshot like a photograph of the atmosphere, it's more like collecting a movie of the atmosphere. You're getting hours of data, and so this is giving you a lot more information. The other thing interesting about drones is that they'll often be positioned near the boundary layer where the atmosphere meets the ocean. That's a dangerous area where the hurricane hunter planes do not fly because the winds are really strong, and also hurricanes push towering waves, so it's really dangerous for an airplane to be near the ocean surface.
NOAA's unmanned aircraft systems have the ability to get closer and deeper inside the hurricane. The canister is released from the P-3 plane. The drone is deployed, opens its wingspan and flies through the storm. Once it attains level flight, it begins operations. The data helps to predict the storm's maximum intensity and what's going on inside its inner core. Hurricanes are not only tracked from the air, they are also closely monitored from the sea.
Sea gliders are automated sensors that actually go into the ocean and measure data in the ocean during the time of a hurricane. So they can actually go to depths and record temperature data, salinity data, and get an idea of the oceanic profile. That's important because we know that warm water fuel hurricanes. So if your heat content goes really deep, your warm water goes deep, that actually will give you a lot more fuel over time.
Gliders are deployed in early summer and recovered at the end of the hurricane season. They collect data from ocean depths of about 305 meters. At the surface, they transmit data to NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory, which is then made available worldwide on the web.
Finally, we have more and more satellite data. We have more and more observations. We have more and more real-time data and more computing power from computers that allow us to make forecasts using numerical models. And this has enabled us to make progress, especially in forecasting the trajectory of tropical cyclones.
While projected models show Odal to be moving in a more western direction, the hurricane hunters discover it is, in fact, now moving further north.
So we're predicting a trajectory, and around that we plan an area where it might go. This is the zone that I'm going to call the zone of uncertainty. That's the forecasting cone.
Odal accelerates north-northwest in the direction of the Baja California Peninsula. Getting the forecast right can be a matter of life or death. In order to properly create forecasting models of hurricanes, scientists need to understand how they move. Help may come from a most unlikely place, like a soap bubble. A group of physicists at the University of Bordeaux discovered that when they heated hand-sized soap bubbles, vortices of color swirled into action.
Are you going to make hurricanes? Yes, you could say that. They're not exactly hurricanes, but they're hurricane-like objects, and sometimes they behave in a similar way. When it heats up, you can see that the liquid starts to stir in all directions. These vortices had a very particular dynamic in the sense that they began to rotate very slowly, and then, little by little, they rotated faster and faster. And then this speed began to decline and decrease, and that hit us right away, because hurricanes have a similar behavior.
The movement of a soap bubble vortex follows a path. By studying how these mini soap storms intensify and move, the group developed a mathematical model that can forecast, on a much grander scale, the trajectory of a tropical cyclone.
If we follow the intensity of these eddies, the wind speed in the first 40 or 50 hours, for example, for a hurricane, if we follow how it varies over time, we can predict, for example, when the maximum intensity is going to be reached and what that maximum intensity would be. We can see that in the history of these hurricanes, the variations in relation to the average trajectory, well, they are similar to what we find in the whirlpools of the soap bubble.
The objective of researchers is to better understand and finally succeed in better forecasting of tropical cyclones, hurricanes and typhoons. The objective is to better understand them in order to be able to predict them better to forecast them earlier, to make more precise forecasts and, in any case, to be able to better warn populations that may be threatened.
Les populations éventuellement menacées.
When Odal makes an unexpected sharp turn north, it puts the resort city of Cabo San Lucas directly in its path. It grows into a Category 4 hurricane.
Really originally was forecast to be more out towards sea, and Odal actually stayed to the east of what was originally forecast. It became a very violent and very dangerous hurricane, tracking right towards the Baja Peninsula of Mexico and right towards Cabo San Lucas, a very populated and popular tourist area.
At that point, it was still a little fun and excitement, really silly. Clearly not taking it, as seriously as we should. But then again, everyone else at the same time was saying that it wasn't going to be a big deal. This was fun. We would have some cocktails. We'd be stuck a day. We'd ride the storm out in our hotel. We had food. We'd watch movies. Great, no big deal.
Hurricane Odal barrels towards the resort city of Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. Foreign hotel guests like Jennifer Lowry notice the warning signs of the approaching natural disaster.
Probably at that point in time, never seen rain that severe or winds that intense. Clouds were starting to look real ominous. The tide was coming in. You could feel it in the air. Kind of everything starting to intensify. Kind of a feeling of electricity in the air. And the pace of the hotel staff running around and trying to expedite preparations. They were taking precautions of boarding up the windows, battening down the hatches. Memos going out regularly to all the guests, kind of keeping us in the loop the entire time. The airlines were already talking about the potential for canceling them. So we were just kind of thinking, okay, what are we going to do? We better notify our families and our bosses and whatnot that this is a possibility that we might get stuck for a day or two. That's when it was kind of a brief hint of panic that, okay, this might be serious.
Odal started out as a hurricane, which was relatively gentle. The increase in winds was relatively slow at the beginning. And then, at a certain point, it started a very strong acceleration of the speeds. The speeds started to increase very strongly.
A hurricane will exist through the entire first layer of the atmosphere called the troposphere. The strongest winds in the hurricane will be near the ground. In order to measure and quantify the intensity of a cyclone, we can talk about its winds, the speed of its winds.
It's very important because it's this speed that does the damage. It's not the hurricane alone, but it's the speed of the winds that damages the houses, that destroys the trees.
We consider Category 3 through Category 5 as major hurricanes, capable of doing major structural damage when those winds push into coastal communities.
Odal is a Category 4 cyclone. Its winds were blowing at 220 kilometers per hour.
And even we've had some impacts of hurricanes that were Category 5s offshore, but then weakened before landfall. Category 5 wind speeds exceed 157 miles an hour. For example, Hurricane Katrina. 24 hours before landfall, Katrina had maximum sustained winds more than 175 miles an hour.
But the winds don't tell the entire story about the damage hurricanes can cause.
People think of hurricanes as wind events because we see a lot of video of palm trees blowing around and roofs blowing off houses, but it's actually the flooding that kills most of the people and does most of the economic damage. So really saltwater storm surge and heavy rainfall near the coast and inland tend to kill a lot of people and produce a lot of damage.
The storm surge is the raising of the ocean level when a tropical cyclone arrives on the coast. Winds from the cyclone push the bodies of water towards the coast, creating a rise in the water level. If ever there's a high tide phenomenon at that time, it creates an even greater rise in the water level, and this storm surge creates floods that are often deadly.
In 2012, at its peak, Hurricane Sandy stretched 900 miles along the Atlantic coast of the United States. The massive superstorm made landfall at high tide.
As it moved towards the mid-Atlantic coast, the wind field greatly expanded, and so the strong winds were blowing over hundreds of miles of coastline, but unfortunately that enabled it to push tremendous amounts of salt water all along the mid-Atlantic and the New England coast. Tremendous area got impacted by strong winds and really high saltwater storm surge as well.
The resulting storm surge was catastrophic. 346,000 homes were destroyed along the New Jersey shore, tens of billions of dollars of damage, and a total of 285 lives were lost.
Floodwaters kill more people in hurricanes than the wind, but what we use for the classification of this storm is the wind category. And so this blindsides a lot of people. I spent about 10 to 12 years building the first storm surge database for the United States, and it's basically the comprehensive flood history for coastal communities from Texas to Maine. So it really builds that archive of data from the mid-1800s to present, so people can actually drill down into their community and actually see their community flood history, which gives us a good idea of risk analysis. Oftentimes I find people say, hey, I've lived in this place for 20 or 30 years, my property never floods. But we look back deeper into the history and we say, well, 40, 50, 100 years ago, there was a storm here that put at least, a meter or several feet of water over your property.
But there are other identifiers when it comes to coastal flooding. The evidence is not hard to find once you know where to look.
When we think of coastal flooding, sometimes we think of salt water slowly coming up. During a storm surge, the water's pushing in incredibly rapidly and it's filled with debris. And it can actually rub tree bark off of trees, and this is a sign where we can come back here and see how high the water level got.
Really, an important thing is for people to be able to assess their risk. We need both models and data for this. So the reason we need models is that hurricanes are rare events and every hurricane is different. So we need a model to get an idea of flood potential, because the next hurricane is probably going to look a little bit different than all the historical ones. So we need to get an idea of what can happen in the future. That said, we need to look back into the data to get an idea of what's happened over time, because we can see high water marks that happened decades ago, or even in some areas more than a century ago. That can provide guidance to validate the models and to give us an idea where we're over-predicting or under-predicting flood risk.
Although hurricanes from a century ago were fueled by unusually warm temperatures from the Atlantic Ocean, today the Atlantic is surpassing even those temperatures and getting warmer. Are severe hurricanes destined to strike more often? The risk may be greater than we know.
2020 hurricane season broke all records for the number of named storms in the tropical North Atlantic. This had everything to do with just prime development conditions. We're seeing warmer waters in many areas. This can actually increase the number of hurricanes because we're increasing that threshold of required water temperature to support hurricanes.
In the resorts of Cabo San Lucas, at the tip of the narrow and remote Baja Peninsula, some 26,000 foreign tourists are stranded. There is no place to run.
At that point, they were grounding flights or planes on the tarmac at the airport and making them turn right back around. So all flights were grounded at that point. Around maybe 2 or 3 in the afternoon, the tide started to really kick up. The waves were crashing onto the beaches, taking out some of the little beach cabana huts, and the winds were kicking into super high gear. And the rain started to get really intense. The hotel workers were running around trying to make preparations, trying to rapidly sweep water from the courtyard because it was starting to flood. You're more than welcome to ride out the storm in your room, but if you feel safer, please come to the hotel ballroom. It's in the center of the hotel, and we have shelter for you.
In the early morning hours of September 15th, Odal reaches the shores of the Baja Peninsula.
Odal intensified from a tropical depression to a tropical storm, making landfall near Cabo San Lucas as a Category 3 hurricane with wind speeds of around 110 knots, or around 200 kilometers an hour, about 127 miles an hour.
Jennifer and her friends decide to ride out the storm in their room.
The power started to officially go out completely in our room and flicker and then go out completely. And everybody kind of went, kind of like a shriek. We're starting to get a little panicked because things were rapidly intensifying. So at that point, yes, we were in total darkness. So all communication at that point ceased. The last thing that our family members or friends heard from us were those messages saying, things are getting really bad. Just so you know where we are, we're safe, but you may not hear from us. It was starting to occur kind of in the back of our heads that what we thought was going to be fun and games and an extra day of vacation may quickly turn into worst case scenario, just at the rate that things were intensifying. The windows in the hotel room started to shake. You could start to feel your joints almost expand with the change in the pressure. The toilets and the plumbing were starting to suck water back out. So there was water coming out of the toilets and there was debris starting to come out and everything was it felt like a suction. And the windows were shaking more and more. We were definitely scared, thinking, okay, now what do we do? The storm sounded like a freight train hitting the hotel. There are very, very eerie noises coming from the windows and the stairwells. There's this one sound from the stairwell that I will never, ever be able to get out of my head for as long as I live. It's the creepiest sound I've ever heard. Basically, the hurricane playing the hotel like a wind instrument. A palm tree snapped off and smashed into our window. There was water seeping through the glass panes in the window into the room. So we decided at that point this was serious enough for us to go take shelter. It took 3 of us to pull the door open because the suction was that strong at that point. And we just grabbed hands and made a run for it.
Jennifer and her friends join other guests in the hurricane shelter set up in the hotel ballroom.
There were guests that were coming in who had made it back on their own, who were bleeding and fallen, but about 85% of the hotel rooms were completely ruined, windows shattered. There's stories of furniture flying through the window, glass breaking. People were coming in looking horrified, injured, bloody. Once we saw the panic and concern from not only the guests who had been through hurricanes before, but the hotel staff, that's when it really started to think, okay, we may not make it. This was terrifying.
By 11 o'clock at night, the most dangerous part of the hurricane, Odal's eye wall, comes ashore. The eye wall is close to the ocean, where the strongest winds lurk. Drawing energy from heat in the water, it propels this giant monster over Cabo San Lucas.
At any moment, things could have completely collapsed. Doors of the ballroom are going to fly off, and everyone's going to get sucked out. And although that seems like a crazy thought, that's what it felt like. The maintenance people, the hotel staff, they were continuously inspecting the roof to make sure that it wasn't about to fly off. I'd say it was the equivalent of like white knuckle gripping a steering wheel for the next 4 or 5 hours in that hotel ballroom. And then all of a sudden, it got quiet. It got really quiet, and one of the other hotel guests had their iPad up in the weather radar, and they looked, because we were still getting a little bit of Wi-Fi signal at that point. They said, "We're in the eye." And just then, the hotel staff kind of came around and said, "Nobody leave the room. This is just because it's not over." But it was eerily quiet.
It can happen that the eye of the hurricane passes over an island, for example. So the wind blows and then suddenly it stops for an hour, 2 hours, so we think it's over. But in fact, the cyclone continues to advance, and suddenly, finally, it's the other part of the cyclone that's over the island. There the winds start blowing in the other direction since we're on the other side of the eye.
à coup, ils se mettent à souffler dans
And
l'autre
it's
sens.
this that is particularly devastating because, in the end, the houses, the facilities, etc., first suffered an extremely strong wind in one direction,
Extrêmement fort dans un sens.
and then an extremely strong wind in the other.
En gros, toutes les constructions qui avaient...
So basically, all the construction that had held up when the first part of the wall passed through will end up collapsing during the second passage.
When after the eye of the storm passed by and the back wall of the hurricane hit, it felt like a bomb was going off. There were 140-mile-an-hour winds. The whole building shook. It felt like the building was just going to lift off in the air. It was much more violent and terrifying than the initial first half of the storm. And people still filtering into the ballroom, being rescued, looking like they had just been through a nightmare. It was pretty terrifying. The couple that from South Padre Island, that were so calm and collected at first and reassured us that there was absolutely nothing wrong, that they'd been through many of these, they were shrieking and panicking and literally freaking out. The look on their face, the look of horror on their face, was kind of all we needed to think, okay, this is real. Because they said, no, they've never experienced anything like this at this point. Everybody was collectively terrified. And we just sat frozen in the hotel against the wall. We had no idea what to expect. Everything was intensifying. There was do we fear for our lives? What's gonna happen? Are we gonna make it through the night? Nobody knew. It was just kind of, I'd say, organized chaos at that point. I've never felt anything like that in my life, no.
In the early morning hours of September 16th, after spending the night inside the hotel ballroom, resort guests awakened to an eerie silence outside. Hurricane Odal is gone.
But around 6 a.m., the hotel staff started to go out and assess the damage done. And then about 8 a.m., they let us step outside. And it was, I don't think anything could have prepared us for what we saw. It was like landing on a different planet entirely. The hotel was completely destroyed. And the strength of a storm could do that much damage was, there's no words to describe it really. I think that was at that point where I was just in awe of what had happened and the power of those types of storms. There was furniture in the hotel fountain, cars flipped over. It was unreal. I've never seen anything like it at that point. Our room was one of the ones that was not entirely destroyed, and we were allowed to go back there if we wanted to. However, just because it wasn't destroyed doesn't mean it was livable. There were still 3 inches of water on the ground. There was sewage and debris that had been sucked up through the toilet that was stuck to the walls. We really didn't notice until the day after the storm how bad the situation was. That was when we heard that the airport had been completely destroyed and that the marina was completely destroyed. Yeah, the roads were washed out and there were no cars to drive, amongst other things. But the more severe rumor was that we wouldn't be getting out of here for at least a month before they would be able to get the airport in shape to get people out of there. But the thought of being there a month, we didn't know, the thought of, okay, what are we gonna do for food, for water? What are our families gonna think we're dead? There was just a ton, thoughts were swirling. It was pretty terrifying.
But while Odal has moved on, the storm is not over.
Alors ce cyclone, il va se déplacer.
So this cyclone, it will move and it will have 2 ways to die. The first way is that if it ever reaches land,
Si jamais il atteint une terre,
if it ever reaches land, it will no longer be above the energy source that sustains it.
qui le fait vivre. Du coup, il va commencer à diminuer en intensité.
As a result, it will begin to diminish in intensity. And a second effect is if it ever encounters regions of the atmosphere where there is strong vertical wind shear. Let's say that the cyclone must be seen as a tube, and the top of the cyclone must not be separated from the bottom, otherwise it weakens it, it kills it. And if ever a cyclone encounters areas where it's suddenly sheared off, there, it'll also make it less intense.
Odal weakens after passing over the Baja Peninsula. It crosses the Gulf of California with rains that reach into Arizona and New Mexico, where it ends as a tropical storm. In total, Odal led to the deaths of 18 people and over $1 billion in damage during its 9-day existence. But what made this storm unique is that it rapidly intensified and changed course, taking everyone by surprise.
Odal was moving a little bit erratically. It was hard to forecast the track. There were a lot of question marks with this storm. The models, originally were suggesting that this storm stays out to sea.
When a hurricane forms in the west of the United States, it moves towards the west. So it goes to the ocean, it goes to Hawaii, it rarely comes back to the United States and Mexico. So Hurricane Odal is quite a rare event.
Odal was quite rare. It was only the third major hurricane, Category 3 or above, to strike the Baja Peninsula of Mexico. Pretty rare in that part of the world. We don't see a lot of major hurricane impacts.
In Cabo San Lucas, food and water is rationed. The Mexican military performs food drops for the local residents. Resort guests worry their friends and families back home will fear the worst if they don't hear from them.
So the first thing on our minds was, let's get in touch with our family, try and rebook our flights. We'll be out of here tomorrow, maybe, hopefully. The Wi-Fi completely went out.
After being stranded for 4 days on the resort, the wait for these vacationers is over. They are finally going home.
There was word that some of the commercial airlines had started doing rescue missions, like Good Samaritan rescue missions. All we knew was we were going to go to the airport, wait on the tarmac, and get on a plane and go. No, because there was really no airport building, it was a tarmac. They had cleared up enough of the tarmac of the airport to just allow planes to take off. Once we taxied down the runway and we had, wheels up, everyone just started cheering. Everyone was cheering, crying. Great, we're going back home to our, first world lives, and these people are completely, everything's destroyed. They have nothing.
Many of the vacationers, now survivors, began a fund to help the community of Cabo San Lucas rebuild. The unpredictable nature of Hurricane Odal proves that scientists still need to know more about these storms.
Hurricanes, cyclones, it's a subject that speaks to everyone. We've all seen satellite images of cyclones, we've all heard about them in the media, but it's not something that is completely understood by researchers. And this makes it all the more difficult to predict what will happen to them with climate change. It's a really complex issue.
It is up for debate if climate change will produce more hurricanes in the future or not. The models generally suggest that the number of hurricanes may not really change, but the hurricanes that do form may have a tendency to become stronger.
In regards to the influence of climate change on the trajectory of tropical cyclones, on their size, on their speed of movement, there is no clear answer to this. That is to say, the forecasts for the moment are too different to be able to be conclusive on this question.
But most scientists do agree that this destructive force of nature will only get worse and more unpredictable. Recent findings show the average forward speed of hurricanes has been slowing down as average global temperatures warm. When hurricanes stall in one place, they produce huge rainfalls and severe flooding as water rises to record levels. In 2017, Hurricane Harvey sat over Houston for 4 days and dropped over 2 meters of rain in some areas. 68 people were killed.
Another impact that we may see with a changing climate is rapid intensification of hurricanes, especially as they're near the coastal areas. This has a lot of impacts and makes it hard to prepare for them.
The coastlines, they're getting more and more populated, more and more developed. In addition, with climate change and rising water levels, the risk of submersion in the event of a tropical cyclone will be increasingly high. The most effective and radical solution would in any case be to encourage new construction to be carried out further away from the coast.
On September 8, 1900, a 16-foot, about a 5-meter wall of water pushed across Galveston Island, killing 6,000 to 8,000 people when a Category 4 hurricane made landfall. Most people died from the saltwater storm surge. It devastated Galveston. Much of the island was destroyed, and so soon after that, a seawall was built, really protecting the island and protecting the city of Galveston from the tremendous waves and water that can push in during hurricanes.
Walls to protect from rising seas may become part of a future hurricane defense. The statue on Galveston's seawall is in memory of the Great Storm of 1900. It ranks amongst one of the largest hurricanes ever recorded, making it the hardest to forget. On the list of hurricane names, some are retired. There will never be another Sandy, Katrina, or Odal.
Hurricanes or tropical cyclones that have caused too much damage are removed from the list. So we will never have Hurricane Katrina again, never again have Hurricane Matthew. These are names that have been removed from the list because they have too many bad memories.
And for some, those memories can last a lifetime.
There was genuine PTSD that lingered when we got home from the storm, from the hurricane. Any little noise you hear, or if you hear someone passing by your window, complete jumping, because you're constantly on guard. And it took the three of us a very long time to get back into that normal life. An experience like that stays with you forever. Well, first of all, opened my eyes to what the power of nature and what a destructive force it can be, and the strength of a storm like that. That was one of the most intense, terrifying experiences I've ever had in my life.